Shalom, I'm Aaron Cohen, and this is The Heart of the Matter. There was a time, now gone, when Jews were scattered around the world, and the cliche was, wherever you go, there's going to be a small Jewish community, or maybe just a couple Jews. During the 20th century and really the end of the 19th century, that picture began to change as Jewish communities were persecuted, migrated from those places of persecution, and then were destroyed during the Holocaust. But the miraculous creation of the State of Israel, which was very hard won and made a home for the Jewish refugees of Europe and North Africa, created two poles of modern Jewish life, North America and the State of Israel. And that's where most Jews live today. With me are two people who care passionately about the connection between North American Jews and the Jews of the State of Israel. And the way they do that is through Israel education. One of the primary components of building that connection is through the language of Jewish civilization, both ancient and modern, the Hebrew language. Etty Dolgin is founder and director of Gan Gani, a Hebrew immersion school for children. It's associated with her supplementary Jewish education school called Moadon Kol Chadash. And Lanski is a major innovator in Israel experience programming, having founded Shorashim, which leads youth trips to Eastern Europe and Israel for high school students, and is now a major trip provider for Birthright Israel. Anne is known for being a leader of the movement emphasizing mifgash, or encounter, between Israeli and American youth. Anne and Etty, Bruchot habaot, welcome. It's wonderful to have two of the really great leaders and innovators in Israel education and Hebrew education with us. And Etty, why don't you get us started in this exploration by talking a little bit about Gan Gani and what happens there? What does it mean to have a Hebrew immersion program for children?
Gan Gani is offered to children who are the ages of 18 months old to 5 years old. We strongly believe that the earlier you introduce the children to a language, especially a Jewish language, the language of Hebrew, the easier it is going to be for them to take the language and their Jewish identity and put it together. Mm-hmm. Purim in Hebrew, Passover in Hebrew, going to eat in Hebrew, going to hear a story in Hebrew.
In having visited your school, one of the things that's remarkable, first of all, is to see these tiny little toddlers with native Hebrew-speaking teachers speaking Hebrew, and to realize that these children don't come from Hebrew-speaking households.
They don't. Most of our parents are parents who have decided or have understood that acquiring a language at a very young age is an easier role for the child to do. It's an easier for the parents not to have to wait till they are 12 or 13. And academically, they incline to be more apt to learn more things since they're learning two things at the same time. Mm-hmm. They're learning the Hebrew terms. They already are able to match them with the English equivalent. Mm-hmm. So to those parents who sometimes ask, will it disturb my child from learning the English appropriately, the answer is he'll have an easier time to learn any language and put the two together. Mm-hmm. Maybe 10% of our population are Israelis or second generation Israelis, where their grandparents are Israelis, and it has become important to the grandparents to help their children to bring back Hebrew into the homes. Mm-hmm. The rest of them are American people who feel Hebrew is the way to go.
Yeah. And Shorashim has become essentially a household word. I think anybody who thinks of Birthright Israel and knows somebody who's gone on Birthright thinks Shorashim. High school programming, at least in this community of the trips to Eastern Europe and Israel, think Shorashim. And now there's the iCenter, and I guess if I had to guess, the iCenter at some point also will become a household, let's hope, a household term. But what does it mean? What does the iCenter hope to do and has begun doing now?
Well, the iCenter was established in 2008 by the Charles and Lynn Schusterman Family Foundation and the Jim Joseph Foundation is a major national initiative to support the field of pre-collegiate Israel education so that we can ensure that Israel, a connection to Israel and to Israelis, is an integral part of the identity and the education of all young Jews. So what we did is we looked at where is Israel education, where was it living at the time, and what can we do to support and ensure that just like kids who come home from Israel trips or kids who graduate from Gan Gani, it's an integral part of their identity. It's more than just something they learned something about, but it's part of who they are. So the iCenter works across settings with formal and informal camps, schools, synagogue schools, day schools, youth program, any kind of Jewish educational setting or experience to look at how Israel and language, culture, and ultimately building up to a trip to Israel, but particularly how Israel knowledge and experience can be embedded as integral to the culture and the community of all Jewish educational settings. And
it's so interesting to hear both of you talk about this integration of Israel education and understanding of Israel into Jewish identity, because very often I think it's easy for American Jews to, yes, we know Israel exists, we support Israel, but that's a country that's 10,000 miles away. It has a different culture than American culture. The Israelis, the people who inhabit that land, often have come from very different backgrounds from American Jews, and they speak this foreign language, which for Jews, I'd like to say, well, it's not a foreign language. It's your mother tongue that you just don't know yet. You have to learn it. But in this day and age of travel and the internet, it's still very distant. So Etty, it's a long way of saying, how do you bring these two places closer together in your school?
I think that one of the phenomena that I believe has emerged since the beginning of Gan Gani, Mo'adon Kol Hadash, which was the overall umbrella of Gan Gani, it's the experiential Hebrew school model, taking after a camp-style method of immersion, doing it together. And when we started with Gan Gani, we noticed that more and more families, now that Gan Gani have been in its 8th year, 9th year, we started to see families who choose to move their experience of becoming a bar and bat mitzvah to Israel, where the education up to now was linked so closely to Israel that it's no longer even an issue at home. Where should our child become a bar and bat mitzvah? 4 families are leaving next week to become Bnei Mitzvah, one on top of Masada, one in Neot Kdumim, one in Gamla. And the preparation for that became part of their education. 2 of these children are a product of Gan Gani from 9 years ago. And working towards that personal identity, language, and Jewish identity is all immersed in one bit of education. And I think that's a great accomplishment on our part, that they would find it important and necessary to live towards visiting Israel and being there while they're doing a very personal and important experience.
So in some respects, we have a couple different concepts on the table here. We've got a Gan Gani, an immersion program, where those little kids, and I've been there, I've seen it, it's unbelievable to me, but they walk out of a street of Chicago and into a piece of Israel in Hebrew, and that's remarkable, and they're immersed in that. iCenter, when we talk of K through 12, well, they won't be necessarily having that kind of an immersion experience, the people who experience iCenter programming. And could you tell us a little bit about what those students will be experiencing in the future when they encounter iCenter programming?
Well, there's certain components that we've defined as the aleph bet of teaching Israel and Jewish education. And 2 of the most critical components ultimately are an experience in Israel and Hebrew language and culture immersion. It's about becoming. And there's something I'm thinking about when we take kids from Chicago to Israel, whether on the high school trip or on Birthright Israel or bar mitzvahs, I'm sure it's the same. They leave home and they get on a plane to go to Israel. But the magic is when they get back on the plane, they're leaving home to come home. And so they've become something. And it's part of that, the language and the culture and the people, the mifgash, you have to, I mean, you touch the kotel, it's 5,000 years of connection. They could have learned about it until 8th grade or until 12th grade, but when they're standing there, or when the plane lands in Israel and they have, the chill, there's something about it that brings it all together and cements it in a very foundational way, and that is who they've become. And that's where language comes in, that language is a part of your identity, and we're not just focusing on knowledge acquisition in terms of the information and the facts that you know, but it's becoming who you are. And how many Birthright kids from Chicago have I spoken to in different landscapes in Israel saying, why did I take Spanish when I was in high school? I thought it was going to help me. It's irrelevant to my life. I wish I took Hebrew. I want to understand now. It's my language. And to have somebody say it's my language.
I'm just going to, I don't think this is a digression, but this is something that sticks profoundly with me. And in the interest of full disclosure, I've traveled to Israel with Etty 10 times, with sometimes hundreds of students. So I know the power of what you're talking about. But here's the anecdote. I can't tell you how many times I was sitting with an 8th grader on a bus in Israel and asking them, because they're about to go to high school, oh, and what language do you plan to take? Oh, I'm going to take Latin. I'm going to take Spanish. I'm going to take German. And I'd say, well, you could take Hebrew, because I think it's about 8 high schools do offer, public high schools offer Hebrew language instruction. And then Etty, remember there was a survey done after you had taken 1,000 Chicago area kids to Israel. And here's the piece of information that just blows me away still. Apparently, of those students who went on Tam Yisrael, 68%, when they came back, elected, if they had the opportunity, elected to take Hebrew in high school. So, what is it about language, and what is it about that particular language that is so powerful in your mind?
I think that anyone who learns something new and they are able to use it, we see it at camp, at a program of our camp that has Chalutzim program, where Hebrew immersion is also such an important part of the camp life. And I see it with the little ones. When you're able to acquire something new and being able to use it immediately, it's not a year later, it's not a preparation for a trip that you're going to take 3 years after you learn it. We teach something that happens around the table in the playroom, and when the children go to the dining room to actually eat lunch, they use it. So they're asking for the various foods in Hebrew, and they get it. And the sense of the satisfaction and gratification of being able to say something, do it, and my goodness, I was able to do it. I have a very small anecdote of a child who went to an interview for one of the schools after they graduated Gan Gani, and he was sitting in one of the major schools, private schools in Chicago, and the interviewer asked the child, can you spell your name? And the child sitting back, smiling, looked at him and said, in what language?
The child how old, Etty?
5. It was actually 4. He was going into a 4 to 5 program. And the interviewer later on said to me, it wasn't the fact that he knew how to write the name in Hebrew and in English, the fact that he knew to ask the question, that he needed to know in what environment he is. So our teaching is also allowing the kids to be able to differentiate between the people they speak Hebrew to and those that speak English to, and their academic ability becomes a lot deeper.
And we spoke a little bit earlier about this issue that Hebrew and just about every American Jew is going to know Hebrew in a liturgical context, but not necessarily know Hebrew as the language of a vibrant, evolving, very rich culture in Israel. How do you cross that? Do you see it as crossing a kind of a divide? And
Definitely. First, I saw it as a mother, as a parent, that my son was born in Israel, so technically his first language until he was 2 was Hebrew. And then we moved here and he went to school. Unfortunately, we weren't in Chicago, so he couldn't go to Gan Gani, but I would have sent him. But he's now at Schechter, and he is still fluent in Hebrew. And during the year, he knows the words, but his accent is very American, like all his friends here. And when he goes to Israel for the summer, not his mannerisms, his intonations, everything becomes very Israeli authentically. And when we came home, we were in the taxi from the airport to our house, and it was the first time in 6 weeks he started humming to himself some liturgy. Mm-hmm. And it occurred to me, and then one more thing, we went into the house, and I, in Chicago, started asking him a question in Hebrew, like I had all summer in Israel. Mm-hmm. And he said, Im, I can't. It's not just, and this is what Etty does so well, it's not just about being bilingual or knowing another language, it's being bicultural. Mm-hmm. And that what Etty does and what we do when we teach modern Hebrew is we enable kids not just to learn some words that they know the translation of and the meaning of, mm-hmm. but it becomes culturally part of their identity. And so it's very powerful. It's very powerful. And we, in supplementary education here, we're pressured for time, particularly in synagogues. We have a number of hours, and we need to prepare for bar and bat mitzvahs and all of the rituals that we do here. And it's a beautiful thing to be able to participate in the language of the prayers, in Hebrew, in tefillot. So you have to choose, because you can't do both. There's just not enough time. And so more times than not here, we're focusing on liturgy. And when you ask kids, what Hebrew word do you know? They all know it's shalom. Mm-hmm. But if you ask what else do you know, they'll say some words in Hebrew. Mm-hmm. But if you ask kids who are products of public high school Hebrew, of a trip to Israel, of Gan Gani, of any congregational school that also focuses on modern Hebrew and has the time to do so, Chalutzim, Ramah, any of these camps, their eyes will light up, and mm-hmm. it's a whole different part of their identity. Mm-hmm. It's very different. It's mm-hmm. not words that they know.
Mm-hmm. I speaking of Hebrew, I just thought now of the word shalom. Everybody knows, shalom means peace, but really the root of shalom has to do with wholeness, the mm-hmm. concept of being whole.
That's right.
What I'm gleaning here is that in order to have a whole identity, Jewish identity, an identity that is shalem, that is complete, you really need the Hebrew component. You need the understanding of wisdom, tradition, and religion, and you need the modern Israel component, and you need to know where you are here as a Jew in the United States. That's an awfully big. that's a very tall order. How do we get to that point, Etty?
I think that in preparation for Purim now, as we begin now to prepare for Purim, and as we have evolved in explaining what a Megillah is, and the rolling part of the Megillah, mm-hmm. yet the kids started to roll on the floor, mm-hmm. and they were rolling different toys, so the Megillah, which is an item, mm-hmm. it's a
the
concept,
scroll,
the
mm-hmm.
scroll,
mm-hmm.
this concept became something you do, you act. When we quoted several sentences from the Megillah, מה יעשה לאיש אשר המלך חפץ ביקרו, what would be done to someone that the king really likes, we talk to them in that language. In other words, what would you like to have for lunch today? We would say, מה יעשה לילדה אשר המורה חפצה ביקרה. So the immersion, the being able to feel that they're being talked to mm-hmm. in the same language as the Megillah, mm-hmm. that's mm-hmm. what completes the two, what you call mm-hmm. the biculture. It's not just the religious aspect of learning mm-hmm. our sources, mm-hmm. but the language is so useful. Mm-hmm. So much of the Bible is not ancient. It's not of their time. It's of ours. Avel v'chafui rosh, I'm sad. There's a word and a term and an idiom we use today. Yeah. And we use it with the kids. So we ask 2-year-olds, can you show us what would you be like if you were avel v'chafui rosh? And they will put their heads down and their expression of the face will change. Can you show us what it means ליהודים הייתה אורה ושמחה? And they're light. So they're living the actual Megillah. And this is how I think you can do it. I also want to make a comment that you can do it in the limited time that we have, even in the Hebrew school settings, supplementary schools, congregational schools. It has to start from very young. All of our schools have young age children, and if we start the Hebrew, maybe not as a full language, but we expose them to the language from a very young age, we're able to use it on and on and on.
And I know, having participated in Community Foundation for Jewish Education, Ulpan, Hebrew, where adults are coming to learn Hebrew, so many of those adults are very happy and pleased to be learning Hebrew, but sad that they waited until that point in their lives. The iCenter is looking for innovation, Anne. I mean, you had just recently in a day of innovation, an innovation forum or symposium. What are some of the ideas that are innovative in terms of, you know, accomplishing for more and more people what Etty has described, and that is integrating this piece of Hebrew, of Israel, of culture into life?
Well, I want to say the event that we had was called the iChallenge. It's a Chicago community initiative to energize and enrich Jewish education. And I will say that of the 60 applicants that we got requests for ideas for funding, 6 of them had to do very similarly with what Etty's talking about, and many of them as a result of their experience at Etty School and their longing for it in other places in the community. So, but there's a couple things. Number one, with regard to innovation, is there's amazing people in this community and around the country. And each one of us is so busy where we're at within our own institution or our own walls. We don't have enough time. We don't make the time to sit together, to think creatively together, and to build new things and create new visions together. And the cross-pollination of the people and the ideas and the denominations and the institutions is what's going to enrich all of us. And so that was the purpose of bringing everyone together for that morning, is to do nothing about content. It was strictly implementation of creative thinking and innovative thinking and brainstorming in really collaborative ways with people that you never get to sit with and talk with or think with that way. But the underlying thing is what Etty said. It's about being organic in your education, being relevant, and it being embedded all along the process. That you can't all of a sudden in 7th grade tell somebody, we're going to study Israel and Hebrew, and it's your language and it's your homeland, and now it is you. It doesn't work that way. It's about the way that it's embedded, and this is one of the things the iCenter does, is it works on, first of all, reaching out and supporting all of these great initiatives that are driven by amazing people with great vision and ideas and ability to translate idea into action and experience, and then to embed them in ways that make sense and that are relevant and exciting to kids, so that ultimately we'll see a Jewish education system, pre-K through 12th grade, that has Hebrew embedded and integrated in big and small ways all the way through, same in connection to Israel and into Israelis, as well as all the other subjects that are experienced and learned. It's like, I go back always, my best analogies are Israel experiences, but it's the day that the North American child in Israel says, why do we, as opposed to why do Israelis? Because we are the Jewish people, and Hebrew is our language, and it's when it becomes theirs.
The Federation and JUF contributors who are watching, and who get JUF news are hopefully aware this is one of the things we wrestle with, because we make such an attempt to bring Israel into people's consciousness, and often we feel forced to do it in an advocacy kind of setting, because we know that for so many people, JUF News may be the only place where they're experiencing the full bandwidth of Israel. But if you turn on the TV or read the newspaper, it's about a conflict, and that conflict does not equate to Israel. Israel is complete. It's a culture, it's arts, it's a society, it's a civilization. And yes, there's conflict, but that that conflict in no way, shape, or form defines what the society or culture or civilization is all about. And you had made an interesting comment earlier about this difference between advocacy and what you're trying to
Well,
to
when
accomplish.
we talk about a comprehensive Israel education, we talk about three components. We talk about knowledge acquisition, we talk about engagement and experiences, and we talk about advocating in the broadest sense of the word, which could include political advocacy, of course, but advocating as being Israel in the world, taking a stand, synthesizing what you've done and what you've learned and who you've become, and acting upon it, supporting, being a positive advocate and supporter of Israel. And so we logically know that if we reflect, if our education reflects all three things, we have the strongest link to a future generation that is connected inextricably to Israel and the Jewish people. If we focus and have time only on one or two of those things, it's just, I think it's a little less solid. So that the fact that we start earlier, that we have these kind of experiences at camps, and I mean, Chicago, I can say, because I'm working nationally now, Chicago is a leader in Israel and Hebrew education in this country in amazing ways. We have camps that have Hebrew immersion units at camp. We have Gan Gani. We have 9 public high schools. The iCenter did a survey. There's 36 public high schools in in the United States that offer Hebrew, 5,000 kids, and 600 of them are sitting in Chicago, an hour a day, 5 days a week, 4 years doing Hebrew, language and culture immersion. Birthright Israel, community buses, the value of the parents' involvement, of the mifkashim, the P2K work here, the Shorashim work here. Chicago has led the way in so many, Tam Yisrael taking 8th graders to Israel, right on for Israel. And it's just one, people laugh at me all the time, but there's so much talent and so much great vision in the city, and the Federation has always been supportive of this, within institutions and outside of institutions with initiatives that support families within them. We're determined to continue to lead the way in this because we're determined to build a strong future and strong identities in our kids, and it is through language and culture immersion, experiences in Israel, and connections to Israelis that is one essential ingredient to a Jewish education and a Jewish educational system.
That the more we give them integrated education, the more we sing the songs of our people that are not conflict songs, that are happy songs, that are children's songs, that talk about the animals and about the fairy tales, and they talk about the foods, and they talk about the who am I, through the songs, through the stories, through the toys. They're bringing the games from Israel, where a child can yell, Ani rotza, instead of not knowing what that means. We will raise young people to whom the language, the culture, their religious aspects, and their totality will be much more solid and less apologizing, less feeling that I may not know enough. I agree with you 100%. One of the most important goals is knowledge, knowledge, knowledge.
Fantastic. Toda rabba lachen.
Toda rabba lecha.
This has been a wonderful conversation, and I hope that the people who are viewing this, first of all, pass the link on, share it with others. To learn more about the iCenter, visit www.theiCenter, that's ICENTER.org. If you want to learn more about Gan Gani, the website is www.moadon.info, and Moadon is MOADON.info. I'd love to hear your questions, your comments, and your suggestions, and you can write to me, Aaron Cohen, at AARONCOHEN@JUF.org, or write to 30 South Wells Street, Chicago, Illinois, 60606.